Rain hammered the hospital windows as alarms blinked like distant stars, and Daniel Carter said, "I'm here, Lily, I'm not leaving." The hallway smelled of antiseptic and fear as an elevator chimed and a nurse rushed past with a chart clutched tight. Lily Carter's small hand trembled inside his, warm but weakening, and her breath came in soft whistles that made Daniel count seconds. A doctor with tired eyes stepped in, and Daniel said, "You promised you'd fix this," though he knew promises were not medicine. The doctor paused, voice low, and said, "We've done everything we can." Lily blinked up with brave confusion and said, "Daddy, you said we'd see the fireworks." Daniel smiled a breaking smile and said, "We will, baby, I swear," while his chest burned with the lie's heat. Thunder rolled, monitors sang a thin mechanical lullaby, and the fluorescent lights buzzed like insects. Daniel traced the bracelet on her wrist and said, "Close your eyes, and I'll tell you the colors." She nodded, lashes damp, and he said, "Red like summer strawberries, gold like the sun you draw." The doctor looked at the floor and said, "I'm sorry," and the world tilted. Daniel swallowed a roar and said, "You hold on, Lily, hold on for me," as outside the storm answered with a hard, merciless drum. The storm softened to a steady hiss as Daniel counted Lily's breaths like beads on a broken necklace, and he said, "Remember the backyard shows, kiddo, the sparklers you called magic wands." He pictured a summer night when the grass smelled green and she danced in circles, and he said, "I promised you the big show by the river." Lily smiled sleepily and said, "You said we'd go when I got better." A soft alarm coughed and faded as a nurse adjusted a line with gentle fingers. Daniel's mind clawed at bargains, and he said, "Take my strength, take my days, just let her see one more sky." The room hummed with tired machines and the thin rattle of HVAC vents. He pressed his palm over her heart and said, "I can be brave if you show me how." Rain pecked at the glass, 1,000 tiny knuckles. Lily said, "Tell me the colors again," and he laughed once, short and ruined. He whispered, "Blue like the midnight river, white like the moon we named." The hallway clock ticked, dry and certain, and Daniel said, "I will carry you there if I have to," while knowing the river had already moved on. A volunteer cart squeaked by with plastic-wrapped books, and Daniel said, "We used to read the one about the lighthouse. Remember the brave little keeper?" Lily nodded, lids heavy, and said, "He kept the light on for everyone." Daniel felt the word everyone like a weight and said, "I only need it for you." The doctor's shoes paused outside, leather whispering against the floor, then moved on, and silence settled like a blanket with stitching undone. Daniel traced a small ink star on Lily's wrist from last week's clinic game and said, "I should have brought markers." She said, "You brought you." He almost laughed, then said, "That's all I have, baby." The monitor blinked a tiny constellation of numbers, loyal and indifferent. Daniel inhaled the sharp smell of sanitizer in memory and said, "When you're better, we'll eat funnel cake and get powdered sugar on our noses." Lily said, "Promise." He answered, "Promise," and the word tasted like smoke and sweet, both. Lightning crawled away toward the river, leaving a hush that made every breath loud, and Daniel said, "If I could put the sky in a jar, I would hand it to you." Lily focused on his mouth as if speech itself were light to be caught, and she said, "Jar the sky, Daddy." He nodded and said, "I'll find one big enough." The nurse returned with a blanket warmed in a metal drawer, tucking edges with practiced kindness. Daniel said, "Thank you," and the nurse said, "She's a fighter," though the word fighter felt like a postcard from a place they could not reach. The clock's second hand stepped on, polite and merciless. Daniel lowered his forehead to the mattress rail and said, "I should have been more, sooner, better." Lily touched his hair with 2 fingers and said, "You are enough." He breathed once, steadying, and said, "Then I will be enough all night long." The city exhaled in the distance, sirens receding to a thin ribbon, and Daniel said, "Do you hear that, Lily, the world making room for your wish?" She answered, "My wish is fireworks," and her mouth curled like a drawn moon. Daniel squeezed her hand and said, "We will see them together, letting the vow hang like a lantern he could not hold. The doctor finally returned with a chart that looked heavier than paper, and he said, "Daniel, may we talk?" Daniel shook his head and said, "Say it here, please." Doctor's face folded and he said, "There's nothing more we can do." Air left the room, as if a window had opened inside Daniel's chest. Lily said, "It's okay, Daddy," with the courage of someone far older than 8. He leaned close and said, "I will still carry you to the river," though they both knew the shore was already behind them. The monitor kept time, polite and unbroken, as promises thin to thread. Morning light spilled through thin blinds, pale and tired, as Daniel Carter sat slumped in a worn kitchen chair, head bowed. He whispered, "I promised Lily a world bigger than hospital walls." Bills and pink notices spread across the table, each paper another weight. His chest ached as he remembered her voice calling, "Fireworks magic." He rubbed his temples and said, "How do I give her more when all I have is less?" The old coffee pot hissed like it shared his exhaustion, filling the room with bitter steam. He looked at the cracked clock above the stove, each tick mocking his helplessness. Daniel said, "I'll work another shift, another job, anything." He thought of the construction site, the calloused hands, the hours lost while Lily waited. He whispered, "She deserves color, not concrete." A neighbor's laughter bled through the wall, sharp in his hollow quiet. Daniel's eyes blurred as he said, "I will not break this promise." He closed his fist on the table, steadying himself against despair. The world felt heavier than his shoulders, but his voice cracked with resolve. "I'll find a way, Lily, even if it kills me." Daniel pulled his boots tight, laces frayed, and said, "Every nail I drive is for you, kiddo." He stepped into the damp street, morning drizzle softening asphalt shine. The bus groaned, coughing smoke as he climbed aboard, shoulders hunched. He gripped the rail, staring at worn ads promising easy loans, and said, "Nothing's easy when it's real." His reflection in the window stared back, older than his 38 years, eyes ringed in sleepless gray. The city rolled past in fractured neon and tired storefronts. Daniel thought of Lily's laughter and said, "I'll trade every sunrise for one more of yours." The bus rattled over potholes, passengers shifting, eyes hollow. He pressed his palm flat against the glass, tracing invisible fireworks in fog. A child across the aisle giggled, and his chest pinched at the sound. He whispered, "She will laugh again." The bus lurched, tossing him forward, but he straightened, jaw hard, whispering, "I can't stop now." At the construction site, steel skeletons stretched against gray clouds, and Daniel hammered nails until palms split. He said, "Every strike gets us closer, Lily." Sweat carved rivers through dust, mixing with blood at his knuckles. His foreman barked orders, but Daniel barely heard, lost in thoughts of fireworks across a night sky. Sparks from welders rained nearby, lighting the air like brief celebrations. He said not yet, but soon. His arms ached, back bent, but he refused to stop. A co-worker offered water, and Daniel muttered, "I can't rest, not now." The scaffolding groaned as heavy beams rose, and Daniel pictured lifting Lily onto his shoulders to see stars. His chest burned, lungs raw with grit, yet his mouth formed a small smile. He whispered, "For her." Each swing of his hammer echoed like a vow to the sky above, and the sky answered with silence. Evening fell with orange haze as Daniel trudged home, boots heavy with mud. He pushed open the door to Lily's room, quiet except for her shallow breath. He said, "I made it, kiddo," voice cracked with exhaustion. Lily, pale but smiling faintly, whispered, "You look tired, Daddy." He laughed softly, shaking his head, not tired enough to miss this. He sat beside her, pulling a crumpled sketch from his pocket, a rough drawing of fireworks over a river. Lily's eyes brightened and she said, "It's beautiful." He nodded, throat tight, saying, "One day we'll see it together." The machines blinked steady, indifferent, their hum like a metronome for borrowed time. Daniel brushed her hair and whispered, "Every blister, every bruise. It's all worth it if you smile like that." Her fingers grazed his hand, light as paper. She said, Promise me. He swallowed hard and answered, I promise, though his eyes betrayed the cracks in the vow. Night deepened, shadows long, as Daniel read aloud from Lily's favorite storybook, his voice gravel soft. The keeper never let the light go out, he said, glancing at her sleepy smile. Lily whispered, You're my keeper, Daddy. His chest tightened as he kissed her forehead, saying, And I'll keep the light for you, always. The machines clicked softly, shadows flickering with each monitor pulse. Outside, the storm had calmed, leaving the city lights blurred against wet glass. Daniel traced the crayon drawing taped to the wall, whispering, One day, those colors will be ours. Lily's eyes fluttered, drifting between sleep and waking. She said, Don't let go. Daniel pressed his forehead to her small hand, voice trembling, Never. The silence afterward felt sacred, a space where every breath mattered. He thought, even if the promise breaks, she must never see his fear. The bills on Daniel's table multiplied like weeds, red letters screaming final notice. He slammed his fist down and said, I can't breathe under this. His phone buzzed with the foreman's voice reminding him of unpaid union dues, and he said, I'll find a way, don't shut me out now. He thought of Lily, her smile thinning with every day inside that sterile room. He whispered, She deserves the sky, not these walls. Rain drummed against cracked glass, the storm outside mirroring the one in his chest. He scrawled numbers on a scrap of paper, adding and subtracting debts that never balanced. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, untouched, bitter like his fear. A knock came, sharp and unwelcome, and a landlord's voice said, Rent's late again, Daniel. He closed his eyes and muttered, I'll get it, just give me time. Time was the one currency slipping fastest. He pressed his hands to his temples and whispered, God, don't let me fail her. The silence that followed felt like the world had already answered, You are too late. Daniel wiped sweat from his brow as he hauled rebar across the muddy site, lungs burning. His foreman barked, Faster, Carter, or don't bother coming tomorrow. Daniel bit his tongue and muttered, I'm not losing this job. Steel clanged, echoing like cruel laughter against gray sky. His hands blistered, torn knuckles bleeding onto rusted metal. He thought of Lily, fragile as glass, and whispered, I'll give you more, no matter what it takes. A cowworker shook his head, saying, You're killing yourself. Daniel spat grit and said, Better me than her. A crane's groan thundered above, dropping beams that rattled scaffolds. He steadied them with trembling arms, back screaming in protest. Sweat drenched his shirt, mud clinging to his jeans. His body begged to stop, but his vow chained him to motion. He whispered, One more day, one more dollar. The sky pressed low, heavy with rain that would not break, like a held breath waiting to drown him. Back at the hospital, Daniel sat by Lily's bed, eyes red from dust and exhaustion. She smiled weakly and said, You smell like work, Daddy. He chuckled, voice breaking, That's the smell of fireworks being built. She giggled once, then coughed, the sound sharp against the hum of machines. Daniel panicked, reaching for the nurse call, but she held his wrist and whispered, Don't worry, I'm strong. His throat ached as he said, You shouldn't have to be strong. Her fingers traced the folded sketch of fireworks he'd left on the bedside table. She said, One day, you'll take me there. He swallowed hard and forced a smile, answering, Yes, baby, I will. But the monitor's numbers flickered lower, betraying the truth. The nurse entered, adjusting a line, her silence louder than words. Daniel whispered, Hold on, please hold on. Lily closed her eyes, lips curving into a small, trusting smile. His chest collapsed with the weight of her faith, faith he was terrified he couldn't earn. The hospital administrator sat across from Daniel in a sterile office, papers stacked like walls. She said, Your insurance coverage has expired. His heart thudded as he answered, Please, I'll pay, just give me time. She shook her head, voice clipped, Without payment, treatments will halt. Daniel gripped the edge of the chair, knuckles white, whispering, She needs this to live. The woman avoided his eyes, Shuffling forms, her silence a sentence. He slammed his fist on the desk, voice cracking. She is 8 years old. The walls closed in, the clock ticking like a hammer. He leaned forward, desperation spilling. Take my car, take my tools, take anything. Her sigh was weary, mechanical, and she said, I'm sorry. The word felt like poison, dry and final. Daniel staggered out of the office, chest caving, whispering, I swore I wouldn't break. The hallway blurred, nurses passing, their shoes tapping like judgment. He pressed his head against the cool wall, whispering, God, don't take her because of me. Night swallowed the city as Daniel stumbled down empty streets, rain returning in sheets. He whispered, I promised, Lily, I promised. Neon signs flickered, painting his soaked clothes in broken colors. His body shook, exhaustion dragging at every step. He pressed a hand to his chest, gasping, how do I fight what I can't see? Pawn shop glowed ahead, its window full of tools and guitars. He shoved open the door, dripping rain on the linoleum. The clerk eyed him and said, What do you have? Daniel slid his wedding ring onto the counter, voice raw, everything I've got left. The clerk weighed it in his palm, unimpressed, and muttered, Not much. Daniel's knees buckled, but he steadied, whispering, It has to be enough. The hum of neon outside buzzed through silence as the clerk wrote a number that stabbed Daniel's hope. He closed his fist around the cash, whispering, For Lily. He stepped back into the rain, money wet in his hand, soul heavier than before. Dr. Miriam Shaw closed the door to a small consultation room, her eyes rimmed with worry, and Daniel said, Tell me what I can do. She laid out lab results like shards of glass. She said, These markers suggest chronic benzene exposure. The word benzene landed like a dropped beam. Daniel shook his head and said, From where? She met his stare and said, Industrial solvents. It can ride home on clothing. Memory clawed at him. Lily hugging his jacket after shifts. Her nose pressed to the denim, like it was a pillow. He whispered, No. Dr. Shaw said, I can't prove source alone, but the pattern fits. The machines in the hall ticked with indifferent breath. Daniel gripped the chair and said, You're saying this got to her because of me. Dr. Shaw bowed her head and said, I'm saying it likely came from proximity. Guilt washed cold and endless. He saw every night he dragged dust through the door. He said, I will fix this whatever it costs. Dr. Shaw said, She needs care now. Money should not decide this. The sentence cracked in two. Daniel stood, swaying. He said, Someone knew about this. Someone let it happen. The site roared under low clouds as Daniel stormed toward the foreman's trailer, rage burning. He slammed the door and said, How long did you know? Foreman, Rick Soto, looked away and said, Orders from above. Daniel stepped closer and said, Above who? Rick whispered. Victor Hale signed the memos. A stack of safety notices lay half hidden, stamped deferred. Daniel said, You sent me home in this poison. Rick's jaw worked. He said, We were told not to spook the crew. Steel moaned beyond the thin walls. Daniel grabbed a memo. The words benzene threshold exceeded screaming in ink. He said, My daughter sleeps under that jacket. Rick flinched, guilt flooding his eyes. He said, I'm sorry, Daniel. Daniel's voice went flat and deadly. He said, Sorry is a grave with flowers. Rain began, slow and hard. He folded the memo and said, You'll testify. Rick nodded like a man walking to water with stones in his pockets. Daniel stepped into the rain and said, Victor Hale will answer. Daniel stood in Lily's room with the jacket in his hands, heavy as guilt. He remembered the night she ran to him saying, You smell like sparks, Daddy. He had laughed then and said, That's how fireworks smell. Now the fabric stank of betrayal. He lifted it to the light and saw a fine dust in the seams. He whispered, What did I bring you, baby? Lily stirred, half awake, and said, You're here. He hid the jacket behind his back and said, Always. His mind unspooled nights of laundry done late, wash cycles rushed, promises louder than warnings. He set the jacket in a plastic bag with hands that shook. He said, I was supposed to keep the light, not carry the dark. The monitor beeped, steady and small. He sealed the bag and felt the click like a verdict. He said, this ends now. He brushed Lily's hair from her forehead, careful as prayer. She smiled, trusting. He said, I'll make it right, but the words trembled like glass before a hammer. In a cramped legal aid office, files rose like walls around Rosa Nguyen, who said, this is a case, but time is cruel. Daniel slid the memo across the desk and said, he knew. Rosa scanned the page, lips thinning. She said, Victor Hale's signature helps, but injunctions take time. Daniel leaned forward and said, she doesn't have time. Rain rattled the window, a tin drum. Rosa said, we can file emergency relief, demand coverage for care. He nodded, desperate. She added, hospital policy may still stall without a guarantee. The word stall scraped like gravel. Daniel said, tell me where to stand and who to move. Rosa looked at him, seeing a father-turned blade. She said, we push public, press, regulators, union. He inhaled and said, I'll burn every hour to light this. Rosa slid a pen to him. She said, then sign. He signed with a hand that would not stop shaking. She said, we start tonight. Hope flickered like a match in wind. Daniel sat on Lily's bed edge, the room quiet except for soft machine breath. He said, I need to tell you something brave. Her eyes opened, wide and clear. She said, I can be brave. He swallowed and said, the smell on my jacket wasn't fireworks. It was something bad from work. She studied him like a puzzle. He said, I didn't know, but it hurt you. Silence settled, tender and heavy. Lily reached for his hand and said, you didn't mean to. He broke on the word didn't. He said, I promised you the river show, and I brought home a storm. She squeezed his fingers with small, fierce strength. She said, you're still my keeper. Tears slipped free, honest and hot. He said, I will fight them all. I will make the skies safe. She smiled, a lantern in fog. She said, then we'll watch from the window for now. He nodded, vow remade. He said, from the window tonight, we'll count every color. The Union Hall smelled of sweat and ink as Daniel slammed the memo onto a scarred table. He said, Victor Hale poisoned us, and my daughter pays the price. Murmurs rippled, workers shifting uneasily. One man whispered, we all knew something was wrong. Daniel's fists shook, veins rising as he said, this isn't just safety. It's life stolen. Rick stood at the back, eyes lowered. Daniel shouted, you signed us into silence. Rick flinched but nodded, voice low, they threatened jobs, Daniel. Daniel barked, what good is a job if it buries your children? The hall grew hushed, heavy with shared guilt. He raised the paper, waving Hale's signature like a torch. He said, we fight, or we let them kill us one by one. A storm raged outside, thunder snapping like judgment. For the first time voices rose, fight. Daniel's chest heaved, tears stinging, and he whispered, for Lily. The chant built, rattling the rafters, a vow carried on cracked voices. Victor Hale's office gleamed with glass walls and leather chairs, a world apart. Daniel barged in, dripping rain, fists clenched. Hale, silver-haired and calm, said, you have no appointment. Daniel snarled, you have no conscience. He threw the memo onto the polished desk, its ink screaming louder than his voice. Hale leaned back, unshaken, and said, you think you can scare me with paperwork? Daniel leaned across the desk, eyes burning. You knew what you sent home with us, he said. You put poison in my child's lungs. Hale's lips tightened, cold and precise. He said, collateral damage, business is compromised. Daniel slammed both fists down, wood groaning. She is 8 years old. His shout cracked through glass and silence. Hale flinched, but masked it with a smirk. "You'll ruin yourself before you ruin me," he said. Daniel whispered, "Better me than her," trembling with fury. The rain hammered louder, as if the city itself demanded reckoning. Security rushed in, 2 men in black suits, but Daniel didn't move. He said, "Call the police. Let them see this memo." Hale barked, "Get him out." Daniel raised the paper higher, voice shaking but loud. "This is proof," he said, "and I'll burn it into every camera I find." Hale's mask cracked, fury replacing calm. He hissed, "Do you know what you're doing?" Daniel's jaw trembled but held. "Saving what I can of her," he said. The guards grabbed his arms, hauling him back. Papers scattered, white wings across the floor. Daniel yelled, "Everyone will know." Hale rose, slamming his palm on the desk, shouting, "You're finished." Daniel's voice, ragged but defiant, echoed back, "No, Victor, you are." The storm lit the skyline in jagged silver. Daniel's face, framed by lightning, bore grief sharpened into resolve. The guards dragged him into the corridor, but the vow had already been spoken into walls that could not unhear it. Daniel stumbled back into the hospital, jacket torn, lip split, but his eyes alive with fire. He collapsed into Lily's room, clutching her hand. "I told him," he said, voice shaking. She blinked weakly, asking, "Did he listen?" He smiled through blood, whispering, "He will." Machines beeped steady, fragile rhythms of borrowed time. Daniel kissed her forehead, whispering, "They can't bury truth." Rosa entered, placing a hand on his shoulder, saying, "The papers are filed. Press is already circling." Daniel nodded, tears blurring his battered face. "Then the fight is louder now," he said. Lily coughed, breath thin, and said, "Daddy, you look like a warrior." His throat broke at the word. He whispered, "For you, always for you." The storm quieted outside, but inside, tension hummed like lightning waiting to fall. Daniel sat by her, hand unshakable on hers. He said, "We fight together until the sky gives us back its colors." The courtroom swelled with voices, reporters flashing cameras, but Daniel only saw Lily's drawing clutched in his fist. He stepped forward, Rosa at his side, and said, "This is for every child stolen by greed." Victor Hale sat stiff across the aisle, lawyers whispering like shadows. Daniel raised the memo high, voice cracking, "You signed death warrants with ink." Gasps echoed as cameras clicked, light exploding. Hale glared, face pale, muttering, "You'll regret this." Daniel's chest rose, heavy but unbroken. "I already regret every night she breathed poison," he said. The judge banged the gavel, order called, but the storm had already been loosed. Daniel whispered, "Hold on, Lily," as if she could hear. He gripped the drawing tighter, its colors smudged by his sweat. Outside, rain stopped, leaving clean air. For the first time he let himself believe. The promise might yet be remade in truth. The fight was no longer his alone. It belonged to every voice that now rose behind him. Morning found Daniel in the chapel, wood pews polished by years of grief, his hands aching to hold what time stole. He said, "I have no bargains left. Only love." Light filtered through stained glass, painting the floor in broken jewels. He whispered, "If there's mercy, lend it to Lily first." Memories pressed in like waves, but he stayed upright, a keeper at a failing lamp. Rosa entered quietly and said, "The judge granted emergency coverage." Daniel exhaled a ragged breath and said, "Then she gets what she needs." Rosa added, "The press is loud, and regulators louder." He nodded, eyes wet, "Make them keep listening." Bells chimed the hour, soft as a benediction without promises. Daniel said, "I cannot untie the past, but I can walk the rest clean." He stood, steadied by a vow stripped of every lie. In Lily's room, machines hummed a steadier tune, and Daniel traced the line of her cheek with a trembling finger. He said, "They'll pay for what they took, but today you get care." Lily blinked slowly and said, "Did you fight the dragon?" He smiled and said, "I swung until my arms forgot fear." Dr. Miriam Shaw checked charts, calm precision hiding a tired heart. She said medication is approved, and specialists are inbound. Daniel's shoulders sagged with relief that hurt like healing. He said, "Thank you for not letting money be the gate." Dr. Shaw met his eyes and said, "Her courage opens more doors than my pen." Lily whispered, "Fireworks from the window tonight." Daniel nodded, "Every color we can count." The room felt bigger than its walls, wide as a sky he could finally name. Daniel carried a plastic bin to the laundry room, every shirt a map of old mistakes. He said, "No more dust crossing our door." He washed the denim jacket last, sealing it after in a labeled bag like evidence. He whispered, "I won't worship work that kills." The machine churned, a drum beating out new rules in soap and water. He taped a sign above the hamper that read "Change before hugs." He said, "A ritual, not a wall." Rick stood in the hall, cap crushed in his hands, and said, "I'm testifying tomorrow." Daniel paused, the old anger dimmed by fatigue. He said, "Do it for the kids who don't know the words yet." Rick nodded, voice thin, "I should have sooner." Daniel answered, "Sooner is gone, but better is here." The washer clicked off like a verdict he could accept. At the river walk by dusk, Daniel unrolled a thin blanket beneath a canopy outside Lily's window. He said, "I brought the sky closer." Nurses tilted the bed so she could see beyond the glass. Lily breathed in the cool air that slipped under the frame and said, "It smells like mint and rain." Daniel smiled, lifting a small battery lantern that pulsed gentle gold. He said, "First light, our light." The city stirred, headlights forming a slow parade across water. Rosa called to confirm the injunction posting, her voice easy for once. Daniel answered, "Stay with it until their check's clear." She said, "Already on it." He turned back to Lily and whispered, "Tonight is a rehearsal for better nights." The river returned the promise with patient ripples. He believed it for one unbroken minute. Night settled like a quiet oath, and Daniel lifted Lily so her eyes met the city's crown. He said, "Count with me." She whispered, "One for the river, two for the moon." In the distance, a neighborhood celebration cracked open the darkness with small bursts. Daniel laughed, surprised by joy, and said, "Three for the brave." Tiny fireworks bloomed, humble and bright, their colors modest but honest. Lily said, "Four for the keepers." He held her closer, careful of lines and wires, and said, "Five for the ones who learn late and still try." The hospital lights dimmed on schedule, softening the room into sanctuary. Outside, the last spark faded to smoke that smelled like rain and sugar in memory. Daniel kissed her hair and said, "We will chase the rest when morning comes." The promise landed, lighter and true, not a debt but a path. Before sunrise, the hospital quieted into a breath you could hold, and Daniel wrote on a folded napkin because paper felt too official. He said, "Lily, I promised the river show, and I came up short." The words shook like loose nails on a beam that had carried too much. He looked at her sleeping face and said, "You taught me what a promise costs." The chapel bells below murmured the hour, soft as hands setting down a burden. He whispered, "I traded hours, blood and pride, and still the sky stayed far." The city's first light turned the window the color of a bruised peach. He said, "I kept the lamp, little keeper, even when it burned me." The napkin dampened under his palm, where the ink bled into a gray bloom. He added, "If the show must wait, then let it wait on me." A nurse passed with rubber soles that made no judgment. He folded the napkin like a flag and said, "When you wake, I'll read you every color I owe." Dr. Miriam Shaw entered with careful steps that said more than words, and Daniel rose before he asked. She said, "Her numbers are slipping despite the new regimen." He swallowed, the room tilting a degree toward goodbye. He said, "Tell me what to do that isn't standing still." Dr. Shaw's voice gentled into truth. She said, "Hold her. Speak the word she asked for." Rosa called on speaker, saying, "Regulators froze Hale's assets for care." Daniel closed his eyes at the bitter mercy of late justice. He said, "Thank you, but keep pushing even when this room goes quiet. Dr. Shaw adjusted the pillow with hands that had learned both victory and loss. Lily stirred at the sound of Daniel's breath and said, "Are we counting colors today?" He pulled the chair close and said, "We are, my brave light. We'll count them slow." Daniel lifted Lily's head to his shoulder, careful of lines, and turned the bed to the window that framed the river like a kept secret. He said, "Color 1 is dawn gold, the kind that forgives." She smiled, "A tiny harbor." He said, "Color 2 is copper, like your crayon that always broke first." Her breath thinned, but her eyes stayed bright. He said, 3 is blue that learned to be brave, and 4 is white that remembers. Outside, a gull arrowed through the air like a stitch. He said, 5 is green for second chances, even the late ones. He felt her fingers tap twice, their old code for yes. He said, 6 is ember, the last light that refuses to quit. The city woke slow, tires whispering, water catching a brighter edge. He said, 7 is violet for the quiet between heartbeats, where promises live. The room settled into a hush that made every word a chosen stone, and Daniel counted the last lights like prayer beads. He said, 8 is silver for the river when it keeps a secret. Lily's eyelids fluttered, steady, then slow. He said, 9 is rose for the part of me you fixed by just arriving. Dr. Shaw stood in the doorway, not moving, understanding the measure of minutes. He said, 10 is the color I never found a name for, because it was you. Lily exhaled, soft as a page turned in a book almost finished. She said, "That one's ours." He pressed his forehead to hers, a keeper at the lamp he could not save. He said, "I love you beyond the sky I failed to bring." The monitor traced a gentler line, then a quieter one, then a line that wanted only peace. He held her, staying, because leaving had never been in the promise. That evening, the river kept its slow promise to the dark, and Daniel walked the path with Lily's drawing in his jacket. The paper warmed from his hand. He said, "I could not carry you to the show, but you carried me here." The city tested its first festival rockets far away, a rehearsal for strangers, and he did not look up. He knelt at the railing and set the napkin letter beside the drawing, both weighted with a smooth stone. He said, "I will be your keeper until every lamp is out." Water lapped, ordinary and holy. He whispered, "I would do it all again. For you I would." The wind lifted, moving the papers a breath, then letting them rest. He stood with empty hands that still felt like holding. Somewhere a child laughed, bright and whole. Daniel faced the dark water and said, "The promise broke, but the love did not, and the river carried the colors he had named."